So Whitney and I greatly appreciate you guys joining us today for our Lunch and Learn. And we are focused today on evidence-based practices for parent supports during this time of distance learning. So we're going to get into a few ideas about ways that you could think about supporting parents differently. And parents, for the parents who are on the call today, we would like to bring you guys into the conversation too and get your feedback about some of the approaches that we'll be talking about. And then at the end of our time, we are going to show you guys a tool that Whitney will talk about. And the link to those two tools, that's actually one tool, but two pieces of it, are in the chat. There are two links, they're in the chat. And we will, after our time today, we will actually email those out to everybody. And so you will have those, okay? All right, so let's move on here. So we're gonna, our agenda today is just looking at what are the needs of parents currently. What do we know that works with supporting parents in distance learning? And based on an article that we are using for this time, in the article they talk about different stages of intervention to help parents become more engaged in the learning process and to help support parents with all of the things that they are trying to manage. And then, as I said, we have the Parents and Teachers as Collaborative Partners tool. And then we're just going to wrap things up. So we'll get started. So I'd like for you guys to do is pull up your chat feature. So at the bottom of your screen, you have a ribbon and it should say chat. So go ahead and click on that. And now's your opportunity to give us some feedback. First of all, are you a service provider or parent or family member or self-advocate? So put that, what you are. What is the single biggest barrier to supporting your student or child with distance learning? And then the third thing is, what's your favorite Halloween candy? That's easy for me. It's Reese's. So go ahead and add that to the chat. So what role are you? What's your biggest barrier in supporting with distance learning? What's your favorite Halloween candy? All right, Whitney, I'm not hearing you.
I put myself on mute, sorry, so that you guys wouldn't have to hear some of the background noise in my house right now. But I'm seeing a few parents, but mostly service providers.
Okay.
So we look forward to receiving your feedback as we move through the content in this presentation, but also just because we don't have as many parents, this is geared towards supporting service providers to best support you. So we really value any input and feedback that you have to give us as service providers as well. I'm also seeing some candy corn, mini Kit Kats. I'm totally on board with that. Anything mini. It's cute and then you don't feel as guilty about eating it all.
That's right. Exactly. What about barriers? Is anybody posting any barriers?
You gotta give me a second, Emily. I'm trying to read.
Sorry.
I see some encouraging my son to join meetings. Let's see, not being able to physically help students or differentiate accordingly. Technology issues. Supporting communication with parents.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you guys are making me hungry, so I'm glad that it is lunchtime after this. And I also, Emily and I really value hearing about some of the barriers too. And if the content that we are moving through doesn't specifically address it, then I look forward to the conversation we can have after the content to discuss how we can apply this content to some of your barriers.
Fantastic.
Constantly changing procedure. Yes, it's flexibility is the name of the game. We will be talking about psychological flexibility today.
That's right. That's right. There's actually a thing. It is a whole area of research. All right.
Okay.
Well, let's go ahead.
Mostly, oh, sorry, just mostly service providers, Emily.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Fantastic. We're glad to have both groups on here. Absolutely. The perspectives are very valuable for either group. Like I said, we are kind of springboarding from an article that Whitney and I reviewed. And we purposely did not send out this article because it is a very geeky article that took us a very long time to get through. But the point of this is that these folks came up with a multi-stage process to improve the connection and the support with parents during this distance learning time. More specifically, they utilized a couple of evidence-based practices. They also used a therapy called acceptance commitment therapy, which is ABA-based. And we'll touch on that, but we're not going to get too jargony here. What we're trying to do is we're really trying to kind of relay the points, the salient points of what they did, and to try to help all of us kind of think differently about supporting parents and about kind of getting them engaged and how we can do that better. And again, for parents, we're going to be asking your feedback about what things have been like and what are some of your needs. Okay, so if you do feel like geeking out, you can definitely grab this article off the internet and check it out. If you can't pull it or find it anywhere, we'd be glad to send it to you. Okay. So why did we choose this article? Well, one thing is the article is related to telehealth practices for ABA services. And what's important about that is actually, there is a decent body of research for what works in telehealth. And as we all know, we made the shift so quickly to online learning that as I can speak as a technical service provider myself, we were grabbing at straws for a few weeks trying to look for research on how to do this. What do we know? What has been proven to be either evidence-based or a promising practice? And it was a struggle to find things. But telehealth has been going on for a while in different applications, whether it be, your typical medical practice or even mental health supports. So that's been a thing for a while. So we can kind of fall back on that and look at what's been going on. Now, ABA has started to do some research in that field as well. So that's kind of where we're going with choosing this article. So it also talks about the shared challenges. So challenges that we are all experiencing, whether we're service providers or parents, that, really trying to help parents through this and brainstorm and figure out what supports they need, whether it be just that basic internet connection to getting their child who's more impacted to the computer to just attend so that they can learn. And again, this article applies evidence-based practices, and it's not just for kids with autism, but evidence-based practices on what works in instruction. And in particular, these are looking at, we're going to be talking about preference assessments and applying them to parents. So this is kind of an interesting concept, but I think it should give us all some ideas on how we could maybe work a little bit differently with families. Okay. So this is kind of a no-brainer, right? Why has the pandemic been so hard on everyone? Well, for families, of course, the health risk has increased. The anxiety is increased. We are worried about, our precious family members that might be vulnerable because of, medical issues or behavior. There's also economic strain. There's a huge job loss rate at the beginning, and that hasn't come back to normal yet by any means. We've had separations. So at a time when we're anxious and we need support, we can't get it the way we used to with family. So we have to figure out new ways to do that, and they're not quite the same. So that sets us up for that psychological vulnerability. It really creates a picture of, increased mood disorders like depression, anxiety, unfortunately, increase in substance abuse. So, you know, there's just a lot of that happening in reaction to this sudden dramatic change in how we do life. Routines have been thrown out the window, right? Someone mentioned that a little while ago, that, you know, things change so quickly and the needs change so quickly and schedules change and plans for school and this and that and the other. So, you know, our routines are disrupted, and, you know, for folks with autism, that's very difficult. But it is difficult for all of us to have such a change so quickly. So that leads us to a concept called psychological flexibility, okay? So this is a field of research, and basically what it's talking about is, as humans, we all have an element of psychological flexibility in us already. So some people are much more adaptive or flexible than others. But the problem is, this pandemic came so quickly and caused such a dramatic change that it actually is very difficult for us to rely on that psychological flexibility, no matter how good it was to begin with. So, you know, really what we're talking about here is recognizing and adapting to those changes in our environment. They talk about psychological flexibility as being important to be, we use the term mindful, so to be aware and open in the present moment. So to really kind of be in the moment, to recognize what are the needs, rather than letting our anxiety take over and we get too caught up in the future. Another part of psychological flexibility is matching up our values with our actions. Okay, so we may value something very highly, but our actions may not be congruent with that. So psychological flexibility is really when we can try to bring those together. So we might be modifying our values a bit, we might be changing our actions by doing things differently. But again, those are important concepts that are related to that overall adaptation to this change that we've been going through.
And Emily, I'm sure that you're probably going to touch on this in a few slides, but excuse me, I think a good example of this, why did that happen as soon as I wanted to talk? But ways to bring your values in alignment with your actions. And I think sometimes, you know, as parents or as educators, some of the first things that we might say are our values are our children, or supporting the education of our students and caring for our students. And sometimes I think because of the burden that the pandemic has placed on us in terms of managing all of the incoming stressors, the financial stressors, what you're balancing between work, childcare, and that's where bringing it back to mindfulness in the present moment can help to bring awareness to whether or not your actions in that moment do align with your values. And I think that's really interesting when you're getting frustrated with your kids, or maybe you raise your voice because you want them to be quiet. And if you can step outside of those thoughts and recognize that they might not be in alignment with your priorities, it can kind of help you get that awareness to start to take action and change your behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Whitney. That's a really good point. It's a good explanation of what I was talking about. So like I mentioned, there's this therapy, it's kind of a third wave of cognitive behavioral therapy, or behavioral therapy, called acceptance and commitment therapy. And it is a pretty heady approach to therapy. And what I mean by that is it's some of the facets of it are pretty obscure. But for our purposes today, we are talking about mindfulness, which is something that's a big part of ACT, or ACT is what they call it. And so what this does is it brings that concept of being in that present moment, and it also kind of overlays traditional ABA practices on that. So how can we do that using ABA practices? So when they say acceptance, what they're talking about here is being open and aware to just the human condition. So there's going to be sadness, there's going to be stress in our lives, and that's just the way it is. And we can try to prevent that, and we can try to do things so that it doesn't happen, but it's going to happen. So that acceptance is just knowing that and just being okay with that. Like, it's going to get hard, but things will get better. And so it's that recognition of again, there are hard times, there are good times, and it's all part of being a human. Commitment then is really looking at what are our values? You know, what's important to us? Can we work towards those values, which may lead to our behavior change? And it may also lead to less sadness and less stress. So here's a little visual that might help to kind of understand it. So basically what they're talking about is using ACT, and we're going to be applying some of this to the work that we're talking about with us. Clarifying values, and then having committed actions. And what they mean by committed actions is, again, recognizing and getting to know what are your values and looking at what are your current actions. And if there's a big gap, we want to bring that gap closer together so that we're getting closer to our values, or we're living more authentically with our values. And also, again, that element of mindfulness, which helps in the moment us be able to see and evaluate our own behavior. And so they say that this leads to increases in positive reinforcement in our lives. And so, you know, if you think about it, if you are able to be more consistent with what you think is important, that is going to be more reinforcing, right? It's going to be just a happier, more joyful kind of way of being. They also talk about how this decreases aversive control. And what they mean by that is, with parents, it actually decreases punishment. So parents are less likely to punish or to, you know, escalate and, you know, be what they call aversive, which I think that's a pretty strong term, but it does, they do talk about how this decreases, you know, that just kind of that reaction by parents to punish. Okay, so let's talk about the stages, because I think that's going to allow us to really understand what we're talking about here and how it might benefit us. So in stage 1 of this process, and we're not showing you these stages because we expect you to write these down and go out and accomplish this treatment using the stages, not at all. But we want to give you guys some thoughts and ideas of how to maybe approach things differently and how to support parents a little bit differently. So in stage 1, these folks from this article, they clarified the parent values. Okay, so they used a couple of tools to do that, and you know, we're not going to share those tools. It doesn't really matter. But the point is, they asked the parents certain questions to really clarify what's important to the parent. Is it important for you, for your child, to make straight A's? Is it important for you to spend a certain amount of quality of time each day with your child? Is it important that your house is clean? Is it important that you get the dog out for a walk once a day? So those kind of things. And you see on here the miracle question. So that's kind of an old psychological trick in therapy, to basically ask someone, you know, if this wasn't going on, if the pandemic wasn't going on, would you be able to have a clean house? Would you be able to support your child in the way you want to support them? What does that look like? So it can help clarify values for a parent. And then you want to look at, and they did in this article, do they match with the committed actions of the parents? So are the parents actually able to, at this point in time, live to their value system? And so that's important information, because again, if you have that gap, as a service provider or a teacher or support person, you want to try to figure out, are there ways that we can bring those closer together? Okay, so here's a little bit more of what we're talking about here. So if you're working with a grandmother who has a few children that she is supporting, a couple of them are special needs, and I'm thinking about a particular family that I've worked with. So the grandmother was asked, what's important to you? And she said, well, you know, Anthony's trying to learn his letters, and that's really important to me because I want him to learn his letters. I think he can. And he seems pretty motivated to do that. But when we look at the grandmother's actions, or, you know, basically what she's doing at home, when ideally she could be working with him on his letters, well, she has all this other stuff she has to do too. She has to help him get dressed and fed. She has to help the other kids get dressed and fed. Oh yeah, she has to work. She has to take care of the house. And ideally at night, she would want to rest. So you can see this is a difficult scenario, right? Because you can't, she's probably not having a whole lot of time in her day to do this to the standard she wants, okay? So let's take a second here and pause, okay? And you can write this in the chat feature if you have some thoughts here, or you can just think about it yourself. But if you're a school staff or service provider, with this step of kind of identifying what's important and then what's actually going on, would this give you good information about why you're seeing the parent struggle? And have you noticed disconnects like this with the families you've worked with? So is this something you're already in touch with? And if you're a parent, if a service provider or teacher talked to you in this way or took you through this process, would it help you feel more understood, and would it help you feel more valued? And could it even be insightful for you? Like, I didn't realize that there was such a difference between what I want to do ideally and what's going on. So go ahead in the chat and put it in some comments, or just think about this. And Wendy, if we're not seeing any chat remarks, we can certainly move on.
I figured I'd give a minute, but so far it's a quiet group. They like talking about candy, but.
Well, that's fine. I like talking about candy too. And it's okay if you don't put anything down in the chat, but the main thing is that take a second and really kind of think about this, and think about if you could do this with a parent, and would it, again, give you a little bit more information about why that particular parent is struggling and in what areas. And then that could certainly lead you perhaps a little quicker and maybe more effectively into what supports they might need. All right. Stage 2 is actually where they did a parent-focused preference assessment. And if for the parents that are on the call, and for other folks on the call, if you haven't had much experience with preference assessments, we use them a lot in our work through the Autism Education Consortium with school teams, because what we find is that when we do preference assessments, you find out what's really interesting or motivating for the student. And so you can take that information very quickly and you can apply it to their programming and see, you know, improvements pretty quickly. So you see that increase in desired behaviors, and also just overall the improved quality of life, because the student is surrounded by things they like, and that makes them feel better, and it's just a happier state for them. So in particular, you know, what are so great about preference assessments? Well, overall, they're pretty easy to do and they're time efficient. We also discover what's highly motivating activity-wise or item-wise from the student. And this goes with what they did with parents in this article as well. So figuring out what's motivating for them. And again, you can take that information and quickly apply it to a student's programming. And in this scenario, we'll see what they did with parents and how they applied that information to help bring those two concepts of the values and the actions together. All right, so this is Anthony's grandmother. So what they found was, I'm not sure what's happening here, but I'll bring it back. I think it's my, maybe my internet decided to do something funky. So with Anthony's grandmother, they did a preference assessment and they tried to find out what was important to her, okay? And almost there. What they found out is that she likes to play cards and games with the kids. She likes to play hide and seek with them. She likes to watch Sesame Street herself, and the kids do too, but she frankly likes Sesame Street quite a bit. And I do too. I used to love to watch that. And now my kids are grown, so it feels weird watching it by myself. She loves to listen to music all the time. There's always music playing in the house. And she likes a clean house. She likes her house to be neat. And as you can imagine, that's probably an ongoing battle with kids in the house like that. So that's what they found out about her. You know, these are the things that she likes. So think about this for a minute. Again, if you're a staff or service provider, how could learning about these kind of preferences help with the implementation of student supports? How could you apply that to the goals the learning goals that you're trying to accomplish with the students? And parents, have you ever had a service provider or teacher ask you about your interests or preferences? And do you think this would help to build rapport between you and the teacher?
Let's see.
So just spend a minute and think about that a little bit. Because I would think as a parent, if I was asked about what are some of my interests, you know, what motivates me, to me that would make me feel a little bit more, I guess, trusting of the service provider, or making them feel, or making me feel like more valued.
As far as I know, Emily, we do have one parent in the group, and the response in the chat room was that, you know, this would be helpful. You know, I wonder if for service providers, sometimes, you know, taking the time to kind of ascertain values or activities that the family or parent is interested in. Let's see, we're getting some more feedback. It helps to make you feel as though service providers are listening when you're taking the time to find out this information. And like Emily said, you know, if we're not participating in the chat, but as a service provider, if, you know, to take some time to reflect on if these are some typical actions that we take in our support to families. Okay, here we're getting some more. That they love this idea and that it would support and reinforce the value of the relationship between the service provider and the parents. And I think that collaboration is really the name of the game right now, right? With having to move everything to virtual and having to work together to not only support students, but also to really support parents and the family dynamic right now too. Let's see, I'm seeing some other thoughts on questions about what the preference assessment could look like and an opportunity to add these preferences as rewards or breaks for the student. So I think that those are excellent discussion points. And as far as what the preference assessment could look like, the article touched on, I think it's called like the
MAPA.
Yeah, which I can't even remember what that.
Yeah, MAPA, M-A-P-A. So what they did was there were no parent preference assessments out there. Okay, so this article pulled from an old type of assessment and they kind of customize it for their purposes. So for service providers out there, there's an opportunity for us to develop this. You know, so that's what they did. So basically it's just, you know, interviewing the parents, asking them questions about, you know, what's important to them, how they spend their time. If they had, you know, plenty of leisure time, what would they do? You know, things like that. So, you know, luckily a preference assessment for a parent could be a lot easier than a preference assessment for a student.
But you might be able to search that if you were interested in finding an adult-centered preference assessment, or like Emily had mentioned, really, you know, the overall concept here would be to gain an idea of what activities and interests this parent has so that you can try to get engagement and motivation to perform certain activities that align with the student goals too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So anything else, Wendy? Because I see my little chat feature lighting up, but I can't see the chats.
Yep, give me just 1 second, make sure. Building rapport.
Yeah.
And then here's Katie, our facilitator, about using activities that may already be happening in the home. And I think that's something that we will touch on later when we look at the tool that some of our colleagues developed, and how that can really align with some of these steps. So
yeah, perfect. All right, so in stage 3, these guys in the article, they, and I put here visually presented because we love visual presentations and visual supports. But for the parent meeting, they came up with basically kind of a matrix of what are the parent values, where are the parent preferences, and how can we merge those with the child's treatment goals or their instructional goals, and what materials do we need? So they merged all this together in this stage, and kind of here's what an example of what that looked like. So for the grandmother, it was reviewing ABCs during a Go Fish card game. Okay, she loves to play games. So she just inserted basically that instruction into the card game. Also having an ABC scavenger hunt while cleaning the house. So the kids are looking for different letters as they dust the table, as they vacuum the floor. So she's hidden things around the house that the children can find. Also using plastic letters as tokens while playing hide and seek. So, you know, based on who isn't found, they earn a letter, and, you know, Anthony would say what letter that was. So this is just a very simple example of how this child's educational goal, the alphabet, learning the alphabet, was incorporated into preferences of the grandmothers. She likes to do these things, and because she likes to do them, that raises her behavior momentum. She's more likely to incorporate the instruction into these activities, okay? Because it's easier for her, it's more enjoyable. Okay, so here's another opportunity for you guys to chime in. Would this be doable to link a student's tasks with parent preferences? If you're a service provider, how easy do you think this would be? Or how tricky do you think it would be? Okay, if you're a parent, would it make it easier to support your child if you could make that task part of your routine or part of an activity you like to do? What do you guys think about that?
let's see, I'm seeing some might be helpful in getting some in-home instruction to occur.
Yeah.
A good goal.
Exactly, yes. And I think it's important to underscore here that this article and the way we're presenting it today is in no way meant to be critical at all of parents. I am a parent, Whitney's a parent. We've been juggling since this started. All this is about is how to connect and how to help parents decrease their stress and do some of the things they want to do and need to do. And it has gotten me to think about my own behavior with my 14-year-old daughter and how I can do some of these things with her. Whitney's smiling. Any?
There was a comment in the chat room about not coming off as snarky, and it was not received that way at all. I think, you know, one of our hopes with this presentation is that while some of the stages and the interventions might sound a bit technical, we thought that it had our goal was to bring it down to some concrete actions that could help to improve our support and our work with parents. And clearly we're looking to increase at-home instruction because that's where the majority of us are learning right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Anything else, Whitney, or should we move on to stage 4?
So I think we can move on to stage 4.
Okay, so I'll take over the chat.
Okay.
Okay, great.
So just to kind of continue to build off of what Emily has been sharing with you guys about finding out where the parent's values lies, doing a preference assessment, and then identifying where the mismatch might be, and also where you can start to incorporate preferences and values and align that with some of the student goals. And she has brought up some really good opportunities for that in terms of like watching Sesame Street and how that was something that grandmother enjoyed. And that's a pretty meaningful way to work on ABCs and learning with your students. So I think we'll talk about this a little bit with the tool too. But within psychological flexibility, I think that the same flexible thinking can be applied to at-home instruction. And this was mentioned in the chat room as well, but incorporating activities within the home that are learning and that count for academic instruction and life skills as well. And so the next step is, once you have identified some of these activities, I think the article termed it activity-based intervention. So what you have done from the results of the preference assessment and with identifying values is you've worked with this this caregiver to identify some activities that allow you to accomplish both. So it might be something that the parent enjoys, it's within their values, and then you have identified activities that you can take within, or actions that you can take within these activities to start to build on those goals. And what the article suggested was using a behavioral skills training approach to teach some of these support strategies to parents. How many of you guys are familiar with behavioral skills training?
You guys can chime in the chat if you like.
Mm-hmm. And if it stays quiet, essentially what this is doing, not familiar, okay. So what the research is showing is that just telling somebody what to do, just providing the knowledge, isn't typically enough to actually bring about behavioral change. And so there's this training procedure, behavioral skills training, but what it incorporates is really, you provide a little bit of instruction about what this support would look like. So maybe what it would look like to support ABCs or writing or tracing letters while watching Sesame Street. So you talk about the instruction, then the provider will model what that instruction and support can look like while the parent is watching. And the great thing about this is that this interaction can be done virtually. So the provider will work with the student in front of the caregiver so that the caregiver can watch this interaction and learn from it. Then the next step is that the provider will step back and observe this interaction between the individual, the student, and their caregiver, and then provide feedback. So what you're doing right there is really expanding upon just the initial instruction or education and providing some follow-along guidance to hopefully ensure that that at-home instruction is going to be followed through on. So I wanted to hear from you guys on, you know, now that we have
Sorry.
some idea, oh, that's okay, some examples of activities where you could incorporate some activities in the home where you can incorporate some learning. Can you think of some family activities that might lend themselves to working on some perhaps educational goals that a student might have? While I'm waiting, I thought an excellent example in the article that we read was a parent really enjoyed woodworking. That was actually their vocation. And the student had a goal for some fine motor skills development. And so a way to incorporate both of these together was for the student to be able to work with the parent in their woodworking shop and to identify tasks there to work on some of those fine motor activities. I don't know if that would help to brainstorm any ideas.
So we see on here, let's
Cooking
see.
together.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Emily. You're on the chat
No,
room
go
now.
ahead. Go ahead. No, you can do it if you've got it in front of you. Sure, go ahead.
Oh,
Bing game.
yep. Matching games, sending home a social skills game, yes. And actually, I have seen examples of how to build on, to do social skills instruction, because that's one of those that it's like, okay, well, we're all virtual, we're not in person, so how can we do this social skills instruction? So I think that's an identified need that's kind of becoming a theme of what we are hearing. And so that's great to send home the social skills activity that the family, maybe that could be an after dinner, something that everybody looks forward to is playing a game where you can start to build upon those social skills. And so within that game that you send home, where the behavioral skills training could come into play is with working with the parent on maybe what prompting could look like, or the prompting hierarchy, so that they can teach those skills but also facilitate independence too, and identify, hey, you can actually step back here because your student might know how to greet, but maybe they might need a prompt to have that next step that would make it a reciprocal conversation or a back and forth conversation. Okay, so this is again some of the this starts to look a little technical, but the article within acceptance and commitment therapy started to look at the stages of change for parents, and essentially what you're going to be taking away from this is it suggested that there is a match between the intervention and the support that you're providing to a parent and where they are on the levels of change, the stages of change scale, if that makes sense. So pre-contemplation is you're not really there yet, you're not really thinking about it. Contemplation, like, hey, I'm kind of seeing like this is a need, starting to learn at home, so I'm thinking about it. Preparation, so you're starting to identify what the small goals and long-term goals are going to look like to help you achieve whatever the goal is to support your student with their at-home learning. Action would be actually participating in those actions. So the cooking, the social skills that you guys brought up, which are excellent at-home activities to incorporate various types of learning, whether it's math science with measuring or social development. And then maintenance, just making sure that you're maintaining those skills. Some of the action, I didn't mention this actually in the other slide, but that's also where you might want to look at different creative ways for data collection. And now there are different virtual applications, such as where you can record the interaction of the parent and the student, so that you can start to track where those skills are, where they're headed.
Whitney, here's a good action example. Angela wrote in that she participates behind the scenes with her son on his music Zoom. Now that it's virtual, they can show their appreciation for music also. So that's a nice thing that they can join together on that and develop that further outside of the Zoom.
Yeah, I think that's that sounds to me, Ms. Best, like such a silver lining that you can be more, if it's not stressful and you have the time to be more of a participant or a co-participant in your child's learning, and how that can help you to see what your student might be capable of, and also different strategies to help them learn skills as well. And I know I've participated in some other calls where the flip side of that was that the teachers are really, the educators are really enjoying having parents participate in the learning, because it provides more of a perspective of what daily life at school looks like, and also the different requirements that go into supporting your child. So we wanted to spend some time, and we hope that some of these steps have helped to provide a different perspective and ways that you can support parents and students at home. But within this, and I believe there may have been a lunch and learn on this previously, but we wanted to really promote the work of two of our colleagues, Dr. Shaw and Dr. Woolard, who and also I believe Daniel Orman at the VDOE too, helped to develop this questionnaire for parents, and how to encourage and facilitate collaboration between educators and parents as we're navigating this time of virtual instruction. And we'll send this out as a link like Emily had mentioned, and I think what it does a really nice job of is it asks some targeted questions about what's going on at home, who else are you supporting in home, but then it also really gets into identifying priorities for parents in what times of day and when learning is most likely to occur between the parent and the child, and then also developing goals within those areas, and then breaking it down into concrete steps. Waiting for Emily to
Yes.
progress the slides.
I was just, what I was doing, you guys, in the chat room, and I was just kind of adding to what Angela had said already, and just she commented that it's given her her family a sense of normalcy, and I think that's so powerful, because that's, you know, that's that whole concept of the psychological flexibility, that, you know, this adaptation to something that's been so hard, but thinking about it differently can actually establish those new routines and really, you know, create that sense of peace and normalcy. So thank you for sharing that.
And so this is kind of the product of that questionnaire, and how once you have identified some of these priority skills from the parents, and then what the educator can do is go through and work through how you can go about teaching these skills, and what social skills instruction might look like during a cooking activity, or might look like while folding laundry. And it just provides a really nice outline of identifying the skill and then setting up steps to help address the skill and instruct on the new skill. Okay. And so what we really wanted to hear from you all was if you felt like the tool, if you're not already familiar with it, if you feel like this could be incorporated within within this acceptance and commitment, model that we have talked about today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There was a link to these two forms at the very beginning of our chat. So if you scroll all the way up, you should see it. But again, we'll send them out as well.
Or do you all see areas where supports and strategies like this could help to improve your relationship and collaboration with parents?
So there's a comment that it can be used with in-home training, and that this has been helpful.
That's great.
And she'll share with providers, just excellent.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. I'm sure Emily is too, and I'm sure our
Very,
colleagues
yeah.
that actually develop the supports will also be really happy to hear it, because we're kind of singing its praises in our work too, because it's just, I'm a visual person, and it provides a nice visual structure to how you can start to work with parents. And I just think it aligns really nicely with some of the interventions, the stages that were discussed in this model. And I believe it's available on the ACE website as well. It was highlighted there.
Folks are saying that this has been helpful, practical help to parents. It's geared towards what is available at home and will help them know that we care and we're thinking from their perspective. That's a great statement. Thank you for that. I think that is really important, that parents feel valued and they feel heard and empowered. Nice. All right. Great. Whitney, we are coming up on 7 minutes to go until 1.
Yep. So this was really just kind of a visual of what the different levels of support that go into supporting our students at home and the family at home, and how we as organizations within larger communities can work together to support our students to achieve their goals, either at home or at school, when we hopefully all return to school as well. And I feel like I may have gotten distracted. Sorry, forgive me. But when we were talking about the different stages of change and where somebody might be, one thing would just be to be aware that if the parents might be still feeling a little timid, then that might be a good place to just provide a resource or a little bit of education. Whereas as they move more towards contemplation and action, that's where you might start to get more assertive and look at some of the follow-up steps within the behavioral skills trainings, like the modeling and the feedback and the role play, things like that.
We have a comment here that building relationships is always helpful. They're seeing parents that are either working from home or supporting multiple children. So parent availability is a big issue. But this person says, it's Stephanie, and she says that it does help her to think outside the box when planning for virtual instruction and incorporating goals and how they might be addressed in the home setting. So that's great. That's kind of created that new sense of looking at things. Yeah. All right.
So just to kind of finish up, Emily really wonderfully described psychological flexibility in the beginning of the presentation. And it was our hope as we went through the different stages and different supports and strategies within those stages to just for us as service providers to employ flexibility in how we provide our supports and instruction to families and students, and also how we can support families to be flexible in terms of what academic instruction can look like when we're learning in different environments like the home or the community. And that the beauty of this model is that, like Emily had said, it's couched within ABA or applied behavior analysis, but it really expands and encourages collaboration between different fields. So kind of taking the best of the available literature and finding out how we can best empower and support families. So please reach out to us if you would like the article too, because it is a good read, if anyone has spare time.
And here are our email addresses. Please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to give you some more ideas or share more resources with you. And thank you so much for your input in the chat. It's been great. It's been very interactive, and we love hearing from you guys. It really helps us to see what's going on and to be able to tailor our future Lunch and Learns and other supports for you guys as the audience.
Thank you.
I'm just going to pipe in really quick and just mention that Emily and Whitney, we will add the slides that you've shared today along with the recording that we put out, and the archive link is in the chat if you all want to take a minute to just notice where that is on the ACE website. But wanted to let people know that because that will have the article, full title, the article and all in it as well, so they can get out there and access that. Lots of thank yous coming in here at the end. I also just wanted to see if anybody has any questions here in our last couple minutes, put those in the chat, and remind you that next week we'll have Lunch and Learn on October 15th, and that's going to be with April Lynch and Crystal Hintz. And they're going to be discussing how to recognize and overcome anxiety, which I think we could all benefit from learning a little bit more about how to do that right now.